You have learned to be good. You have studied the right way to live, absorbed the teachings, internalized the principles. You know what you should want, what you should value, what a truly evolved person would desire. And yet, late at night, in the privacy of your own mind, you feel it. That wanting, that pull towards something you have decided is beneath you. Maybe it is the desire for recognition when you know you should be humble. Maybe it is anger when you have committed to compassion. Maybe it is longing for material comfort when you believe you should be content with less. Maybe it is sexual desire that does not align with your spiritual ideals. Whatever it is, you feel it rising up, this natural human impulse, and immediately behind it comes the familiar weight. Guilt. Not the clean guilt of having done something wrong, but the murky, exhausting guilt of simply wanting what you want. You have become your own prosecutor, constantly monitoring your inner life for evidence of moral failure. The more you have grown in your understanding of how one should be, the more you have learned to mistrust your own nature. And so you live in a strange kind of exile, alienated not from the world but from yourself, watching your desires like they are criminals who might break free if you look away for even a moment. This is what happens when morality outpaces wisdom, when we learn the rules of goodness before we understand the nature of being human. We create within ourselves a courtroom where every impulse must stand trial, where every desire must justify its existence before it is allowed to be felt. And here is what you must understand. This internal split, this constant vigilance against your own wanting, it is not evidence of your spiritual progress. It is evidence of a misunderstanding so fundamental that it shapes everything else you experience. You have come to believe that moral development means the elimination of desire, the transcendence of your human nature, the achievement of a state where you want only what you should want. But this belief is based on a confusion between two entirely different processes. One is the development of moral awareness, the capacity to recognize how your actions affect others, to consider consequences, to act with intention and care. The other is the suppression of your humanity in service of an imagined ideal. These are not the same thing. In fact, they are often opposed to each other. Consider what happens in the moment when desire arises and is immediately met with judgment. You feel hungry at a time when you have decided you should not eat. You feel attracted to someone when you believe such attraction is inappropriate. You want rest when you think you should keep working. You feel jealous when you know jealousy is an unworthy emotion. In each case, the natural arising of wanting is followed instantly by condemnation. And what gets condemned is not just the desire, but your very self for having it. You become not a person who feels hungry, but a person with insufficient discipline. Not a person experiencing attraction, but a person with impure thoughts. Not tired, but weak. Not jealous, but small. The desire, which began as a simple fact of your nervous system responding to stimuli, transforms into evidence of your fundamental inadequacy. And this transformation happens so quickly, so automatically, that you often do not notice the leap you have made from observation to judgment, from experiencing to condemning. This pattern creates a particular kind of suffering that is different from the suffering of unexamined desire. When desire is unconscious and acted upon without reflection, it can cause harm, yes. It can lead to actions that hurt others or yourself. This is real and important. But when desire is conscious and immediately condemned, it creates a different problem entirely. It creates a war within you, a constant expenditure of energy on suppressing what continues to arise. It is like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. The ball does not stop wanting to surface. The water does not stop being water. The physics do not change because you have decided they should. And yet you keep pushing, keep straining, exhausting yourself in an effort to make your inner life conform to an idea about how it should be. What makes this particularly insidious is that this internal war often gets mistaken for virtue. The more you struggle against your own nature, the more moral you believe you are becoming. The greater your guilt about your desires, the more evidence you have of your spiritual seriousness. It is as if suffering is the currency with which you purchase goodness. You measure your progress by how much you have managed to suppress, how effectively you have learned to feel bad about feeling. And there is a twisted logic to this. In a world that constantly tells you that spiritual growth means transcending desire, that enlightenment means wanting nothing, that moral development means being above such petty human needs, the presence of guilt becomes proof that you are trying. The shame you feel is your credentials. It demonstrates that you know the difference between right and wrong, that you are aware of the gap between who you are and who you should be. But here is what this entire framework misses. Here is the error at the foundation of this whole construction. Morality is not about the elimination of desire. It is about the relationship between your desires and your actions, between what you want and what you choose to do. A person who feels no desire for what belongs to another has not transcended theft. They have simply never been tempted. But a person who feels the desire, recognizes it, understands it, and chooses not to take what is not theirs, that person has engaged in moral action. The desire is not the problem. The desire is not the failure. The desire is simply information, a signal from your system about what it believes might meet a need or ease a discomfort. What matters, what has always mattered, is what you do with that information. When you condemn desire itself, you lose access to this crucial distinction. You collapse the space between impulse and action, between feeling and doing. If wanting something wrong is the same as doing something wrong, then you are guilty the moment the desire arises. There is no room for choice, no possibility of moral action, because the crime has already been committed in your consciousness. This is a peculiar kind of thought crime, where you prosecute yourself not for what you have done, but for what you have felt. And this prosecution creates a strange relationship to your own experience. You become like someone living in an authoritarian state, constantly monitoring your thoughts, always aware that at any moment you might think something forbidden, feel something unacceptable. The surveillance is total, the judgment is swift, the sentence is guilt. This is where the teaching has been misunderstood. When wisdom traditions speak of transcending desire, they are not talking about feeling nothing. They are talking about not being controlled by what you feel. They are pointing to a freedom that comes not from the absence of wanting, but from a different relationship to wanting. But somewhere along the way, this subtle distinction got lost. The map got confused with the territory. The description of freedom from being driven by desire got interpreted as a commandment to eliminate desire itself. And so people set out on a spiritual path that requires them to wage war against their own humanity, to treat their natural impulses as enemies to be defeated, rather than aspects of themselves to be understood. If this perspective is opening something up for you, consider subscribing. I explore these territories every week, and I would love to have you along for the journey. What happens over time as this war continues is a kind of fracturing of the self. The part of you that wants splits off from the part of you that judges. The wanting becomes secret, shameful, something to be hidden even from yourself. You develop an official version of who you are, the moral self you present to the world and even to your own consciousness. And then there is everything else, the shadow self, that contains all the desires you have decided are unacceptable. This shadow grows in the darkness. It becomes more powerful precisely because it is denied. What you refuse to acknowledge does not disappear. It goes underground, where it operates outside your awareness, influencing your choices and moods and relationships in ways you do not see. You become less integrated, less whole, more fragmented. And paradoxically, this fragmentation makes moral action more difficult, not easier, because you have lost touch with important information about yourself. Think about what it means to make a choice. Real choice requires knowledge of what you actually want, not just what you think you should want. If you have so thoroughly condemned certain desires that you can no longer feel them clearly, how can you possibly navigate the complexity of living in relationship with others? Morality in the real world is rarely about choosing between obvious good and obvious evil. It is about navigating competing goods, conflicting needs, situations where there is no perfect answer. And this navigation requires intimate knowledge of your own motivations, your own patterns, your own places of vulnerability and strength. When you have spent years learning not to know what you want, learning to distrust your inner experience, learning to immediately transform desire into guilt, you have undermined the very capacity that moral action depends upon. I know many of you watching this have been carrying this split inside you for a long time. You have never told anyone, about the exhausting effort it takes to keep policing your own mind, to keep catching yourself in the act of wanting. You might have even convinced yourself that this is just what it means to be a good person, that everyone feels this way. But here is what I want you to understand. The moment you name this pattern, the moment you see it clearly, something shifts. You stop being so completely identified with the judge. You begin to notice that there is a you who wants and a you who condemns the wanting. And maybe, just maybe, there is a you who can observe both of these without needing to immediately side with one against the other. So let me ask you directly, what desire have you been treating as your enemy? What natural human wanting have you been condemning yourself for feeling? I want you to share in the comments, not because I need engagement, but because someone else watching this needs to see your words. They need to know they are not the only one who feels hungry, and then immediately guilty for feeling hungry. They are not alone in wanting recognition, and then hating themselves for not being more humble. And if you cannot find the words right now, if it feels too vulnerable to name the specific desire, just type this: I have been at war with myself. That is it. Just those 6 words. Because when you do, you create permission for dozens of others to acknowledge the same thing. Your honesty helps break the silence that keeps all of us trapped in this cycle of judgment. So comment below. Tell me what you have been fighting against in yourself. I read every single one, and I promise you, you are not alone in this struggle. Now let us examine where this pattern comes from, because understanding its origins can help us see it more clearly. Most of us did not invent this war on our own. We inherited it. We absorbed it from families, from religious teachings, from cultural messages about what it means to be good. And many of these teachings contained important truths wrapped in problematic packaging. The truth: your actions have consequences. You have responsibility for how you affect others. Moral development requires self-reflection. The problematic packaging: your desires are evidence of your corruption. Your natural impulses make you bad. Wanting itself is the problem. The first set of truths can guide you toward acting with care and intention. The second set creates shame, splitting, and an adversarial relationship with your own experience. This confusion is particularly strong when it comes to bodily desires. Hunger, sexual attraction, the need for rest, the desire for physical comfort. These get treated as especially problematic, as signs of being too attached to the material realm, too identified with the flesh. There is a long history of spiritual teaching that positions the body as an obstacle to transcendence, a source of temptation that must be overcome. And while there is something to be understood about not being enslaved to physical impulses, the way this teaching often gets interpreted creates tremendous suffering. People learn to mistrust their bodies, to see appetite itself as dangerous, to believe that the less they need, the more spiritual they are. And so they starve themselves, deprive themselves, override signals of tiredness or hunger or desire for touch, all in service of an ideal of being above such needs. But consider the absurdity of this. You exist as a body. This is not a mistake or a punishment or a temporary condition to be transcended. This is the form of your existence. Your consciousness arises through this physical system. Your experience happens in and through these senses, these nerves, these chemical reactions. To be at war with the body is to be at war with the very ground of your being. It is like trying to have an ocean without water, a fire without heat. The body will continue to signal its needs whether you approve of those needs or not. And when you have learned to immediately condemn these signals, you create enormous internal conflict while solving nothing. The hunger does not stop. The attraction does not cease. The tiredness remains. You have simply added a layer of guilt and judgment on top of the basic biological reality. The same pattern operates with emotional desires. The desire to be seen, to be valued, to matter to others. The desire for security, for comfort, for ease. These are treated as attachments to be eliminated, as signs of spiritual immaturity. And again, there is something worth understanding here about not being driven by these desires, about not organizing your entire life around getting approval or achieving security. But the teaching often goes further, suggesting that the desire itself is the problem, that a truly evolved person would not want these things. That needing recognition means you are operating from ego. That seeking security means you lack faith or trust. And so people learn to feel ashamed of needs that are fundamental to the human experience of being a social animal living in an uncertain world. What gets lost in this framework is the difference between being conscious of a desire and being controlled by it. You can notice that you want approval without spending your life performing for others. You can recognize your fear of insecurity without that fear dictating every choice. You can feel the pull toward comfort without requiring that every moment be comfortable. The consciousness of the desire actually gives you freedom in relation to it. But this freedom only becomes available when you stop treating the desire itself as the enemy. When you can feel the wanting without immediately adding the second layer of wanting not to want. When you can notice, there is the desire for approval, without following that noticing with the judgment, I am a bad person for wanting approval. This is what presence actually means. Not the absence of desire, but the capacity to be with desire without being compelled by it or condemning it. There is something else happening in the dynamic we are examining. When you make desire itself guilty, you lose access to important information about what actually motivates you. You create an official narrative about your intentions that may be quite different from what is actually driving your behavior. You tell yourself you are acting out of compassion when you are actually seeking approval. You tell yourself you are being generous when you are actually trying to control how others see you. You tell yourself you are being humble when you are actually afraid of being seen. This self-deception is not intentional. It happens because you have learned that certain motivations are acceptable and others are not. And so the unacceptable motivations go underground, where they continue to operate, but now without your conscious awareness. This makes you less honest, not more virtuous. It makes your actions less examined, not more moral. Real moral development requires brutal honesty about your actual motivations. It requires looking at the desires you would rather not admit. The needs you have decided make you weak or small or unspiritual. It requires seeing the ways you manipulate situations to get what you want while telling yourself you are above such manipulation. It requires acknowledging your jealousy, your competitiveness, your desire for revenge, your pettiness, your need to be right. None of this acknowledgement means acting on these impulses, but it means knowing they are there, recognizing their influence, understanding how they shape your perceptions and choices. This kind of honesty is uncomfortable. It strips away the comforting story you have been telling about who you are. But it is also the only ground on which genuine moral action can be built. The question then becomes, how do you develop this kind of honest relationship with desire? How do you stop the immediate movement from feeling to judgment? The answer is simpler than you might expect, though the practice is not easy. You begin to notice the desire without immediately doing anything about it. Not acting on it, but also not condemning it. Just seeing it. Oh, there is wanting. There is the pull toward this thing or away from that thing. You observe it the way you might observe weather. You do not judge clouds for forming or wind for blowing. You simply notice. It is cloudy. It is windy. In the same way, you can learn to notice. There is desire for recognition. There is fear of rejection. There is hunger. There is attraction. There is resistance. The desire is not you. It is something happening in you, a wave moving through your system, and you can learn to observe this movement without being swept away by it and without building a wall against it. This observation creates space. In that space, choice becomes possible, not the forced choice of suppression, where you use willpower to override your impulses, but the natural choice that arises from seeing clearly. When you see a desire clearly, when you understand what it is and where it comes from and what it is actually seeking, you often find that the compulsive quality falls away. You might still choose to act on the desire, but now it is a choice rather than a compulsion. Or you might choose not to act on it, but this choice comes from wisdom rather than from fear or shame. You are not fighting yourself. You are simply seeing what is true and acting from that seeing. This is what integration means. Not the elimination of desire, but the inclusion of all of yourself in your awareness. The wanting and the wisdom, the impulse and the intention, the animal nature and the reflective capacity. All of it gets to be present. Nothing has to be exiled into shadow. Nothing has to be condemned for existing. And from this place of integration, moral action becomes simpler. Not easier necessarily, but clearer. Because you are working with your whole self, rather than trying to force one part to dominate another. Now we must address something important. None of this means that all desires should be acted upon. Some desires, if acted upon, would cause genuine harm. Some would violate commitments you have made. Some would betray values that are important to you. The question is not whether every desire should be fulfilled, but whether every desire must be immediately condemned. There is a vast difference between noticing a desire and recognizing that acting on it would not be wise, versus feeling the desire and immediately deciding you are a terrible person for feeling it. The first response leaves you integrated and capable of choice. The second response creates internal fragmentation and actually makes wise choice harder. Consider an example. You are in a committed relationship and you feel attracted to someone else. This attraction arises naturally. It is not something you decided to feel. Your nervous system responded to certain cues, certain features, certain qualities in this person. Now you have several options for how to relate to this attraction. You can immediately condemn yourself for feeling it. Tell yourself you are a bad partner. Feel guilty and ashamed. This creates internal conflict and often leads to either becoming obsessed with the attraction precisely because you are trying so hard not to feel it, or to becoming cold and distant in your primary relationship because you are punishing yourself. Alternatively, you can notice the attraction without judgment. You can acknowledge, yes, there is attraction here. This is a thing that happened. And then you can consider what to do with this information. You might choose to maintain appropriate boundaries with this person because you value your commitment to your partner. Not because feeling attraction is wrong, but because acting on every attraction would undermine something important to you. Or you might recognize that this attraction is pointing to something missing in your primary relationship, something worth exploring honestly with your partner. The point is that none of these choices can be made clearly when you are drowning in guilt about the fact of the attraction itself. If what I am sharing here resonates with something you have been feeling, something you have not quite been able to name, then I want you to know you are not alone in this. There are many of us exploring these questions, sitting with these uncomfortable truths, learning to see in new ways. I create these videos for people who are ready to go deeper, who are not satisfied with surface answers, who want to understand rather than just feel better temporarily. If that is you, consider subscribing, not because you need another channel to follow, but because this journey of understanding yourself, of waking up to what is real, it helps to have companions along the way. People who will not offer you easy fixes, but will sit with you in the questions. I will be here every week with another exploration, another perspective, another thread to pull on, and I would be honored to have you here as part of this community of seekers and thinkers. So if this feels right, hit that subscribe button. And if you found value in this particular exploration, let me know in the comments what resonated most with you. Your reflections often illuminate things I had not considered. What we are really talking about here is the difference between moral awareness and moral narcissism. Moral awareness is the capacity to recognize how your actions affect others, to consider consequences, to act with care and intention. Moral narcissism is the preoccupation with being good, with maintaining an image of yourself as morally superior, with using your adherence to principles as evidence of your specialness. The first leads to wisdom and genuine ethical action. The second leads to self-righteousness and a peculiar kind of selfishness disguised as virtue. And here is what is tricky. Moral narcissism often wears the costume of deep ethical commitment. The person who is constantly monitoring their own thoughts for signs of moral failure, who feels guilty about every desire, who has turned their inner life into a courtroom, this person looks like they are taking morality very seriously. And they are, in a way. They are taking it so seriously that they have made it entirely about themselves. Every desire becomes a test of their goodness. Every impulse is evidence to be weighed in the trial of their character. The focus is not on actual impact in the world, not on how they are showing up for others, but on the state of their own consciousness. Are they pure enough, holy enough, transcendent enough? This is exhausting, and it is also a trap. Because the more you focus on monitoring your own moral purity, the less attention you have available for actually seeing others clearly, for responding to real needs in the world around you, for acting with the kind of spontaneous generosity that arises when you are not constantly worried about whether you are being generous for the right reasons. It is like trying to walk while simultaneously watching yourself walk and judging the quality of each step. You become stiff, self-conscious, unable to move naturally. And movement, action, the engagement with life, this is where morality actually happens. Not in your thoughts about your thoughts, but in the moments when you respond to a person in front of you, when you make a choice about how to use your resources, when you navigate a conflict, when you show up for someone who needs you. The person who has done the work of integrating their desires, who can feel what they feel without immediately condemning it, this person is often more genuinely moral than the person who has learned to suppress everything. Why? Because they have freed up the energy that was going into self-monitoring. Because they are not caught in the constant loop of desire, judgment, guilt, more judgment. Because they can see situations more clearly when they are not viewing everything through the filter of how it reflects on their own goodness. They can respond to what is actually needed rather than to what will make them feel more virtuous. This does not mean they have transcended selfishness. It means they have a realistic relationship with it. They know when they are being selfish. They can see their own manipulations and agendas, and from that seeing, they have a choice about whether to act on those impulses or not. There is a kind of innocence in this approach that might seem paradoxical. You are innocent not because you have no desires that could lead to harm, but because you have stopped pretending you are above such desires. You have stopped maintaining the fiction that moral development means becoming a person who never wants anything problematic. Instead, you have accepted that you are a human being with a full range of impulses, some noble and some petty, some generous and some selfish, some wise and some foolish. And you have learned to be with all of this without needing to exile parts of yourself. This acceptance does not make you less capable of moral action. It makes you more capable because you are working with reality rather than with an idealized image of who you should be. Let us return to guilt, because guilt is the mechanism through which this whole system operates. Guilt says, you have violated a standard, you have failed to live up to what you know is right. And sometimes, guilt is appropriate. If you have genuinely harmed someone through your actions, guilt can be a useful signal that something needs to be addressed, that amends need to be made, that you need to change your behavior. But the guilt we are examining here is different. It is guilt about desire itself, about the fact of wanting. And this guilt serves no useful purpose. It does not prevent harm because no harm has occurred. It does not lead to behavior change because the desire will continue to arise regardless of how guilty you feel about it. It does not make you a better person. It makes you a more conflicted person. This guilt often gets confused with conscience. People believe that feeling guilty about their desires is evidence that their conscience is functioning, that they are morally sensitive. But conscience is about the relationship between actions and values, not about the relationship between feelings and ideals. Conscience says, if I do this thing, it will cause harm or violate a commitment that matters to me. Guilt about desire says, I am bad for feeling this. The first is useful information. The second is self-punishment masquerading as virtue. And the tragedy is that the energy that goes into this self-punishment is energy that could be going toward actually living according to your values. You have finite resources. When you are spending them on internal warfare, you have less available for external action. This is not a trivial point. It is the difference between a life spent mainly in your head, constantly checking your motives and monitoring your thoughts, and a life spent engaged with the world, responding to what arises, acting from a place of integration rather than fragmentation. We should also consider what happens to joy in this framework. When desire becomes guilty, pleasure becomes suspect. If you enjoy something too much, it suggests you are too attached. If you take pleasure in the body, in food, in sex, in comfort, it means you are not sufficiently evolved. If you feel satisfaction from your accomplishments, it reveals your ego. And so even in moments of enjoyment, there is a watcher, a judge, waiting to condemn you for enjoying too much in the wrong way for the wrong reasons. This makes joy itself impossible because joy requires a kind of wholeness, a momentary dropping of self-consciousness, an immersion in experience. But if every experience must be monitored for signs of attachment or ego or inappropriate pleasure, you can never fully be present to anything. You're always divided, always checking yourself, always aware that this enjoyment might be evidence of spiritual failure. This is a terrible way to live. Not because pleasure is the goal of existence, but because this constant self-monitoring prevents the very thing that spiritual practice supposedly aims toward: presence, awareness, direct experience of life as it is. You cannot be present when you are constantly evaluating your own presence. You cannot be aware when you are watching the watcher. You cannot experience life directly when you are filtering everything through the question of whether this experience is spiritually appropriate. The irony is profound. In the name of spiritual development, you have created a system that makes spiritual presence impossible. What would it be like to feel desire arise and simply notice it? What would it be like to want something and not immediately follow that wanting with judgment? What would it be like to enjoy pleasure without needing to justify it or worry about whether you are enjoying it correctly? This might sound indulgent, but it is actually much harder than the system of judgment you have been using. Because when you drop the judgment, you are left with the raw experience of wanting and not wanting, of attraction and aversion, of pleasure and pain. You have to feel it fully rather than immediately covering it with a layer of guilt. You have to be with the intensity of your actual experience rather than replacing it with familiar patterns of self-condemnation. This requires a kind of courage, a willingness to meet yourself as you actually are, rather than as you think you should be. And here is what you might discover in that meeting. The desires you have been treating as enemies are not so monstrous after all. They are often quite ordinary, quite human, quite understandable. You want to be loved. You want to be comfortable. You want to be recognized for your efforts. You want pleasure. You want security. You want to matter. These are not signs of corruption. They are signs of being alive, of being a creature with needs and vulnerabilities and a nervous system that responds to its environment. The problem has never been the desires themselves. The problem has been your relationship to them, the way you have been taught to see them as obstacles to transcendence rather than as information about your human condition. When you stop making desire the enemy, something relaxes. You do not suddenly become a person who acts on every impulse. In fact, you often find that you are less impulsive, because you are not caught in the reactive cycle of suppress, feel guilty, suppress harder, eventually act out. Instead, you are in a more conscious relationship with your wanting. You see it, you understand it, you make choices about it from a place of wholeness rather than fragmentation. And these choices often align more closely with your actual values because they are not distorted by the need to prove your goodness to yourself. You do not need to demonstrate how transcendent you are by denying your needs. You do not need to show how spiritual you are by suffering unnecessarily. You can simply be a person who wants things and chooses wisely about which wants to act on. This brings us back to the title of this exploration. When morality grows, desire becomes a secret guilt. This is not how it has to be. This is what happens when moral development gets confused with self-rejection, when growth gets mistaken for suppression, when wisdom gets replaced with warfare. Real moral development does not create guilt about desire. It creates clarity about the relationship between desire and action. It creates the capacity to see your wanting without being controlled by it. It creates freedom, not through elimination of impulses, but through a different way of being with them. The morality that matters is not about the purity of your inner life. It is about the quality of your actions, the impact you have, the way you show up for others, the choices you make in the face of competing needs and values. You can feel everything you feel and still act with integrity. You can want things you do not act on. You can experience impulses you choose not to follow. You can be fully human and also fully moral. These are not in opposition. They never were. The opposition was created by a misunderstanding, a teaching that got twisted, a framework that turned your own nature into your enemy. And you can step out of that framework, not by achieving some state of desirelessness, but by simply seeing desire differently. Not as a problem to be solved, but as an aspect of being alive. not as evidence of your corruption, but as information about your experience. Not as something to be guilty about, but as something to be conscious of. So perhaps the question is not how to eliminate desire, or how to stop feeling guilty about it. Perhaps the question is how to develop a relationship with your own wanting that is characterized by curiosity rather than condemnation, by awareness rather than warfare, by integration rather than splitting. This is not a one-time achievement. It is an ongoing practice of noticing, of bringing consciousness to the patterns that have been running automatically, of catching the moment between the arising of desire and the falling of judgment. In that moment, in that space, there is freedom. Not freedom from wanting, but freedom to choose how you relate to what you want. And that freedom is what morality has always been about. Not the absence of desire, but the presence of choice. Not the elimination of your humanity, but the integration of all that you are into conscious, intentional, caring action in the world.